many other...
This is right, Arab.
Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast. I'm Giles Gibson in London. Let's take a look now at the latest headlines from around the world. Pressure mounts on UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson after his Conservative Party loses strongholds in London in local elections here in the UK. Tory council leaders blame the losses on the Partygate scandal. Moscow claims that a humanitarian corridor to evacuate civilians from Mariupol is working. That's as the United Nations makes fresh efforts to get civilians out of a besieged steel plant in the Ukrainian city.
The protest side just turned quite tense as police and security officials just fired tear gas right outside the entrance of the Sri Lankan Parliament, where reporters, including myself and everyone gathered here.
Sri Lankan police fire tear gas to disperse protesters in Colombo who gathered near the country's parliament. WION reports from the ground as the country battles political and economic turmoil. Global food prices fell slightly last month after hitting a record in March, but they remain high due to the Ukraine war, says the United Nations. The Asian Games, which were due to be held in Hangzhou in China in September, have been postponed as the country battles a resurgence of COVID cases. And a SpaceX capsule splashes down, bringing 4 astronauts home from a 6-month mission at the International Space Station. It was the 3rd long-duration astronaut team launched by SpaceX so far.
It isn't enough to say sorry.
And our main focus at this hour is on the local elections here in the United Kingdom, where counting is still going on across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. As per the incomplete results so far, Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Conservative Party has lost control of key councils here in London. The Labour Party, led by Sir Keir Starmer, has won control of long-time Conservative strongholds in the capital, including Wandsworth Council and Westminster, for the first time since it was created in 1964. Labour leader Keir Starmer says this victory is a turning point for his party, but the results in England are far from a landslide for the Labour Party. Even though they have fared well here in the capital, their performance has been modest in the rest of England. Labour is seeking to capitalise on a cost of living crisis and the Partygate scandal that has dogged the Conservatives in recent months. Now, looking at the early results, the Liberal Democrats have made the biggest gains so far with more than 50 new councillors. Labour, meanwhile, has gained 33 seats, while the Conservatives have lost around 120 of their councillors. As of now, around half of the votes in England have been counted, with more results going to be trickling in over the course of the day. Meanwhile, results in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are not expected till later in the evening at local time here in the UK. In Northern Ireland, the contest for the devolved assembly in Belfast could see a pro-Irish nationalist party, Sinn Féin, become the biggest single party for the very first time. Sinn Féin, of course, is the former political wing of the paramilitary group, the IRA, and it's been committed over the years to holding a vote on reunification with the Irish Republic to the south. Now, for more insight on all of this, we are joined live on the broadcast by Ben Page from London. He is the Global Chief Executive of Ipsos. Ben, thanks very much for joining us. Let's start off with the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. You've obviously done a lot of polling on his popularity over the years and, of course, in the build-up to the local elections. How would you say the Partygate scandal has damaged the Conservatives as far as the results that we have so far?
Well, I think the Partygate certainly wasn't good for them. The economic crisis in terms of inflation and energy prices, etc., is probably as important, as is this general sense that the public has acquired about Boris Johnson, that for him, it's one rule for him and his friends and another rule for everybody else. And all of those things together mean that his ratings have fallen dramatically over the last year or two. They are not yet, however, at such a low point that it means a recovery is impossible. Mrs. Thatcher was regularly as unpopular as Boris Johnson, but still managed to win general elections. But it's certainly not good news. And the loss of two Conservative flagship councils, one of which has been Conservative controlled since its formation, another Conservative controlled since the 1970s, which were often seen as embodying the Thatcherite values in local government, I think is a real blow. And it's a reminder of how Britain is changing and how Labour is now consolidating its power among the urban, educated parts of the society, people with degrees, and the Conservatives are doing better among people, among traditional older working class voters who in the past, before Brexit, would have tended to vote Labour. So it's a real sort of turnaround. Labour doing better in the south, the Conservatives actually not holding on in many ways in the north of England.
And Ben, you mentioned that turnaround in terms of the voters who are either leaning towards Labour or the Conservatives. The leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, is saying this is a turning point, these local elections. What's your reading of their results so far?
Well, Labour have obviously they've strengthened in areas where they're already strong, like London. But they've also made some headway in the south of England. They've obviously won a council up in Carlisle, but they aren't necessarily outside of London doing the sorts of things that you would expect to see if you knew that you thought they were going to be absolutely on their way to power. This is not like the run-up, for example, to 1997, when Labour were winning councils all over the country in the run-up to that election. And I think that's important because the scale of the battle that Keir Starmer is facing when it comes to a general election against the Conservatives requires a swing of the sort that we we rarely see in British politics. And in fact, he needs a swing almost the same as Tony Blair achieved in 1997. But the local election results he's achieved this time, while positive, and he will spin them that way, they are not suggesting he's yet in a place to achieve that swing.
And Ben, just finally, I want to get your reaction to some of the smaller opposition parties and their results. I mean, what are you seeing in terms of the results coming in for the Green Party as well as the Liberal Democrats, who, of course, have had a really tough few years?
I mean, the Liberal Democrats are back, I think we could say, at least in local government, taking control of some councils, picking up votes all over the country, but particularly in the south. And indeed, for Labour to win a general election, they will need the Liberal Democrats, who are the only valid opposition to the Conservatives in some constituencies. They will need those Liberal Democrats to do well, particularly in their traditional power base of southwest England. And of course, we've also seen the Greens rising, winning more seats around the country, and they're picking up a sizable share of the vote. They're not again going to be having lots of MPs in our system, but it's a reminder that the tectonic plates of British politics continue to shift.
All right, Ben, thank you very much. That's Ben Page from Ipsos giving his reaction to the election results here in the UK, and results will be coming in through the day, so we haven't yet got a complete picture of how the parties have fared so far. All right, let's move on to the war in Ukraine now, where the conflict is now in its third month. Ukraine's government says almost 500 civilians have been evacuated from the Azovstal steel plant in the besieged city of Mariupol. That's in a rescue operation that's been led by the United Nations. The UN said on Thursday that a new convoy would evacuate civilians from the plant, where this last pocket of Ukrainian resistance has been holed up for weeks and weeks now. The United Nations and the International Committee of the Red Cross have previously helped nearly 500 civilians flee from the area. That's in 2 different operations conducted over the course of the past week. Aerial footage of the plant was released on Thursday, showing 3 explosions striking different parts of the vast complex, engulfing it, as you can see, in some really heavy, dark smoke. Fighting in Mariupol continued, though, despite the Russian military promising to pause their activities during the day from Thursday until Saturday in order for civilians to leave.
Слава Україні! Уже 3-ю добу, як ворог прорвався на територію заводу «Азовсталь», де тривають важкі кровопролитні бої. Оборонці міста вже 71 день б'ються сам на сам з переважаючими силами противника. Та чорт забирай, проявляють таку витримку і героїзм, що Україна повинна знати, що означає бути вірним батьківщині.
Now, the Russian government in Moscow has denied that their troops tried to storm the plant. The Kremlin said that humanitarian corridors were operating there on Thursday. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, though, says a prolonged truce is needed to rescue people who are still trapped in the plant.
I think in general we would assess that the majority of Russian forces, ground forces that were dedicated to Mariupol have left and have moved to the north, the north away from Mariupol, and that a small number, roughly the equivalent of a couple of battalion tactical groups, are still in and around Mariupol at this time.
Now, Mariupol is a really important strategic goal for Russian forces because capturing it would allow the country to cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea and also link Russian-controlled territories. Now, for more on this story, our correspondent William Denslow sent us this report from the Latvian capital, Riga.
On Thursday evening, we had a report from the Kremlin that Vladimir Putin, Russia's president, had spoken over the phone with Naftali Bennett, the Prime Minister for Israel. According to the Kremlin, in that phone conversation, President Putin said that he was ready to provide safe passage for those civilians to leave the Azovstal steel plant. He did, in that phone conversation, reportedly also urge Kiev to tell its soldiers, of which there are roughly a few thousand, it's estimated, still in that plant, to lay down their weapons. This, of course, comes, as you rightly mentioned, that there were calls or guarantees from Russia that they would agree this 3-day humanitarian corridors and a cessation of its hostilities from the hours of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. local time, Moscow time. However, of course, we did hear on Thursday from Ukrainian forces on the ground that truce had been violated. Volodymyr Zelensky, addressing the nation on Thursday evening, said that the shelling and assault by Russia was continuing. So the United Nations says that a convoy has arrived in the Azovstal region on Friday, and the hope there for the United Nations and for other aid agencies is very much that this evacuation will be allowed to resume on Friday.
William Denslow reporting for us there from the Latvian capital Riga. Let's stay with the Ukrainian crisis now, and two sisters from the country who managed to escape the besieged city of Mariupol. All they managed to take with them were their video diaries, a few suitcases and some pictures of loved ones. And now the two girls are hoping desperately to be reunited with their family. Take a look at this next report.
This is footage from inside the besieged city of Mariupol near the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's something of a video diary shared with Reuters by two sisters who managed to escape. Their videos show them dash through the streets amid the sounds of shelling, the debris inside their house. Nighttime bombings set their neighbor's home ablaze. A radio broadcast informs residents they were under control of the Russian-backed separatist region called the Donetsk People's Republic. These videos, their suitcases, and a handful of family photos are what the sisters took with them to the relative safety of Kyiv. 28-year-old Vera and 21-year-old Nicole asked Reuters not print their last names out of fear their family back in Mariupol might face retaliation. On this idyllic park bench in the Ukrainian capital, the sisters can watch Vera's 4-year-old son, Kirilo, at play. But their thoughts are with their family, who stayed behind.
Очень хочется, чтобы они выбрались. Не таким путем, как мы, потому что мы прошли.
I really want for them to get out, not the way we did, though. We got out by a miracle, on the verge of life and death. They wouldn't have been able to get through the whole city with us like that, with just a hope to survive, to become free, to come back to peace, and for this to even leave our relatives. Right now there is a chance to evacuate, and we hope that at one point they will pick up their bags, emergency suitcases, and go there, and get out in some way and meet us.
They left a handwritten goodbye to their mother, unsure of when they might see her again. Mariupol has been an important target in Russia's efforts to cut Ukraine off from its Black Sea ports. Russian forces are heavily bombarding the Azovstal steel plant, which stands as the last holdout of resistance in the city. The United Nations and Red Cross evacuated hundreds of people from the city and other areas earlier this week, including dozens from Azovstal during a short-lived UN-brokered ceasefire. Nicole said she has urged her family to try and leave the city, but fears they don't have access to information.
When we got in touch on the phone, I told them, please get out of there. We got out and told them it isn't true what you're being told. Living under an information blockade is really tough because they don't have a radio, no access to information.
In mid-April, the two received a phone call from an unknown number, which turned out to be their mother. They spoke to their mother once more, but the calls have now stopped.
Now, when people ask me, how do you imagine your first day of victory, or how do you imagine your relatives? I can't find the right words, and I immediately want to cry, because it would be the greatest joy for me to have my relatives by my side right now.
Just one of the families that have been caught up in the Ukrainian crisis there. Let's get some more international reaction to the war in Ukraine now. And in his first interview as the British Naval Chief, Admiral Sir Ben Key has said that Russia's President Vladimir Putin will bear a huge cost if he launches an offensive against NATO member countries. Sir Ben made the comments while speaking to the British newspaper The Daily Telegraph, where he said, quotes, "We have to show a robust and resilient posture across the rest of the contact line with Russia so that President Putin understands this is not something that he can broaden without huge costs to him and Russia. The British naval chief also talked about NATO's role in Ukraine's defence. He said that it was imperative that NATO nations work to contain the invasion of Ukraine and that they don't allow it to escalate any further. The British admiral also accused Vladimir Putin of quotes, unquote, egregious wrongdoing against Ukraine, and he said the UK will continue supporting Ukraine's wartime leader Volodymyr Zelensky. The war in Ukraine has largely played out on land until now, but the British admiral says that NATO's naval forces need to remain in a deterrent position to counter Putin's actions and dissuade him from doing more. The admiral said that ships eventually become a target in any conflict, adding that the UK must be prepared for that possibility in the future. Meanwhile, in a bid to impose sanctions and punish Russia's elite in response to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, authorities in Fiji seized a $300 million yacht owned by Russian oligarch Suleiman Kerimov. The 348-foot-long luxury vessel, which is known as the Ahmadiyya, was seized on behalf of authorities in the United States. Here's more details on that story.
Authorities in Fiji seized a $300 million yacht of Russian oligarch Suleiman Kerimov on Thursday. The 348-foot luxury vessel, the Ahmadiyya, arrived in Fiji last month after an 18-day voyage across the Pacific from Mexico. The US requested Fiji to seize the super yacht as its allies imposed sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine, which Russia calls a special military operation. Outgoing White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki announced the seizure.
Fijian authorities executed the request, obtaining a domestic seizure warrant from a Fijian court. As you know, the president has made clear we will go after Russian oligarchs and their ill-gotten gains, using every authority we have to hold them accountable. Oh, and here is the yacht. Look at that. I went to really go with the bang, so we got a yacht, just to make the point about oligarchs.
Kerimov, the yacht's owner, was sanctioned by the United States in 2014 and 2018 in response to Russia's actions in Syria and Ukraine. He has also been sanctioned by the EU. Kerimov has been designated by the US Treasury as part of a group of Russian oligarchs who profit from the Russian government through corruption and its activities around the globe, including the occupation of Crimea.
All right, let's shift our focus over to China now, which is continuing to battle a surge in COVID-19 cases. In the latest developments, Beijing has announced the postponement of the Asian Games, citing its domestic spike in infections. The Games were scheduled to be held from September the 10th to the 25th in the city of Hangzhou. The organisers said that new dates for the Games will be announced in the near future.
The Olympic Council of Asia has already made the announcement. For inquiries related to the postponement, please seek the department in charge.
Reacting to the postponement, the Olympic Council of Asia has said that the decision to postpone was taken by all shareholders after carefully considering the pandemic situation and the sheer size of the Games. Last month, organisers said that they had finished constructing more than 50 competition venues for the Asian Games and the Asian Para Games. Back then, they indicated that they planned to hold the event under a virus control plan. That was one that was based on the model for the recent Beijing Winter Olympics. The announcement comes as China battles a spike in COVID infections. Despite domestic and international criticism, China has continued to plough on with its zero COVID approach. It's imposed strict lockdowns, quarantines and mass testing programs. Beijing says that its stringent policy is a proof that the government values life over material benefits. However, there have been protests against the measures. For example, some residents in Shanghai have spoken out against drastic curbs in that city, and now similar measures could be imposed in Beijing. The Chinese capital reported 66 new domestically transmitted infections over the past 24 hours. And Beijing has identified dozens of new cases per day for about 2 weeks since this outbreak started. Since then, isolated buildings have been placed into lockdown, while restaurants and other public places have also been forced to shut. And in yet another setback to the American pharmaceutical giant, the US Food and Drug Regulator has said that it's limiting the use of the Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine for adults, citing the risk of a rare blood clotting syndrome. The J&J shot was cleared for emergency use in February of last year, and as per the latest announcement, it can now only be administered in places in the US where other vaccines are inaccessible, or for people who cannot get other approved jabs. The FDA has approved 3 vaccines against COVID-19 in the United States, those manufactured by Pfizer, Moderna and J&J. Now, according to data published by US authorities, 15% of cases of the rare blood clotting disease have been fatal in the United States. Both the CDC and the FDA had previously recommended a pause in the use of the vaccine. That pause was then lifted, but it did come with a warning. Symptoms typically begin within 2 weeks of getting the vaccination. They include shortness of breath, chest pain, leg swelling, headaches, blurred vision or red spots just under the skin. Concerns over the vaccine have already limited uptake. Only 18.7 million doses have been administered in the United States so far. That makes up about 3.2% of the total vaccines that have been given out in the United States since the start of the pandemic. And that's all we have time for on this edition of WION Live Broadcast. We're going to leave you with these visuals of a SpaceX capsule splashing down in Florida with 4 members on board after a 6-month mission. Thanks for watching.
This is right, Arab.